Hi there, my friend. I'm Peter Barron. Welcome to today's episode of the Independent School Moonshot Podcast. I am thrilled to be joined by Jared Colley. He's the Chief Innovation Officers at Mount Vernon School in Atlanta. I have just got tremendous admiration for the work that the folks at Mount Vernon are doing. I've collaborated with them a couple of times over the past year or two. And they actually have an organization called Mount Vernon Ventures, which provides consulting services to schools, but it also generates really compelling research to help independent schools find new opportunities across a spectrum of things. And so their latest report just came out, The Flow of Perpetual Learning. Jared is the author of that report, and he's here today to share a little bit more. But before we get into that, Jared Colley, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Peter, thanks for having me. I'm thrilled to be here today to talk about this report and, just to share some of the things we're doing at MV Ventures and at Mount Vernon School. And thank you for having me.
Yeah, anytime. I'm curious though, in case somebody hasn't had a chance to meet you or they're not familiar with Mount Vernon School, can you introduce yourself in the school?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Jared Colley. I am the Chief Innovation Officer at Mount Vernon School, which is a pre-K through 12 independent school in North Atlanta, Georgia. We also, though, have a online high school that is global in terms of its reach, with students that come to our asynchronous high school for all sorts of different reasons. And then additionally to that, as you just stated, we also have Mount Vernon Ventures, or as we call it, MV Ventures sometimes, which is our R&D consultancy, which is outward facing. We partner with other organizations, other schools. We often like to say that transformation needs a guide, somebody maybe from the outside who can partner with you and help you navigate through the complexities of change. And I am here, of course, today representing MV Ventures, because the other thing that we do at MV Ventures is we do a lot of research and publish R&D reports every year based on that research that we're doing. So, of course, we're here to talk about our most recent report.
And we're going to get into that in a second, but I'm such a I know I just love to get into organizational design. And so you recently stepped into this role of the Chief Innovation Officer, and I know it's a newer role at the organization.
It is. It was not a role before. We used to have, you may know Bo Adams here as Chief Learning and Innovation Officer. And as we've gotten bigger, as we've gotten more complex, when he departed, we decided that we needed a Chief Learning Officer. And that is somebody who is really thinking about the quality of what we're delivering in the moment, in terms of programs, in terms of practice, and all of that. And then we also needed someone who is really thinking about what is the 10-year horizon looking like? How can we live in the future in a way that we feel like we have the agency, that we have the information, the data, that we can act towards shaping a preferable future, whether that be for the Mount Vernon community or whether that be for education in a grander scale.
So let's talk about that 10-year vision. I know you're responsible for the innovation pillar within your plan. Um, but I'm like, what does that look like day to day? I'm just super curious and helping people at the school think about it across like a broader time horizon, maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years.
Mhm. Well, I think the first way I like to think about it, and this will probably be familiar language to you, I think I'm like helping us with a dual operating system.
Mm.
That there is the operations of the daily organization, and we got to make sure the trains run on time, but we also need to make sure that we are delivering on what we say that we do in terms of our mission and vision as a school that it claims to be a school of inquiry, innovation, and impact. And I share it that way to say that like innovation lives in the present, not just in the future, right? So it's very important that we're thinking about like how to do things innovatively right now. But I also get to step into the space of that dual operating system aspect of research and design and imagining and thinking, and whether that be skunk works, like what does education look like 5 years from now? What does it look like 10 years from now? And not that we can predict it, not that we can control it, but we can definitely gain greater agency by being more prepared for it. And therefore not just reacting, but acting on like what do we see as being preferable futures, knowing what we know about the research of education, knowing what we know about the competencies that will make people live and thrive and flourish in the age of intelligent machines, as we think about the future. So I have the privilege of being able to have a foot in kind of both spheres of the present, but also of living and thinking and experiencing what might be the future.
What a great place to be. And I know that part of your role then there is dedicated to R&D and the research reports that come out of Mount Vernon Ventures. And so you just, like I mentioned at the beginning, you just published your latest report, the latest Flow of Perpetual Learning. I'd love to know more about that, but also I'd love to know how that's evolved from last year's report where you talked about imagine then and act now. So like, I'd love to kind of connect the dots here and learn more about this year's report.
Yeah. Well, I'll start by telling a little bit about last year's report. One you mentioned about, building futures literacies for learning organizations, which is like the subtitle of the Imagine Then Act Now report.
Yep.
I think that report was a little bit of a higher altitude in that what I saw in the moment was schools had gone through a global pandemic, a racial reckoning, at least in the United States, of things that were born out of the tragic incident of George Floyd, to a hyperpolarized society, to schools that were unpreparedly hit with ChatGPT in November of 2022 with ubiquitous access to anyone. I think these were all examples of what I will call critical uncertainties, which are things that you can't necessarily predict that are going to happen, but when they do, they have a huge impact. So there are things you can't predict that don't have a big impact. That's not a critical uncertainty, right? But these were things that were hitting schools that no one had a handle on, that no one could have said it was exactly going to go this way. And yet they have had such a dramatic impact. So that first report was like, what frameworks, what mental models could we bring to schools, to boards, to school governance, where we could think in terms of having a more robust futures literacy? Not that we could predict the future better, but that we can feel more empowered to act according to our values, no matter what future unfolds.
Yeah.
And that's what futures literacy is really about. That's what futures thinking is about really thinking through all the plausible alternative futures. And I can give a short example before I even wrote this report about how I was living through it. When I joined Mount Vernon, it was in the middle of the shutdown of the pandemic. And one of the first tasks that I was asked to be a part of as head of learning and innovation at that time was this is from our head of school at the time, I need 8 alternative schedules, depending on what the data says about COVID infection rates, of what we could do as a school to keep our doors open. And so we came up with 8 plausible scenarios. Now, did all 8 of those scenarios happen? No, but we definitely acted on at least 3 of them, and we were ready to act in a way that if we hadn't have gone through that kind of futures thinking scenario planning exercise, I think we would have been dithering more. We would have been hesitating more. We would have been a little bit less confident about how do we act in this moment of uncertainty. So that was a lived experience I went through that really inspired this report. And where I looked to for this report was, you can go back to all the way to the 1970s and see Royal Dutch Shell Company engaging in futures thinking through scenario planning, where they thought through a lot of different plausible scenarios that ended up, whether they meant to or not, predicting the oil energy crisis of the late 1970s. And as a result, Royal Dutch Shell went from the number 10 market holder as an energy company to number 3. And so not only did they hold the bottom line, they very much went above their bottom line. And so I was noticing that there's conversations going on in the business world and in, certain strategic circles that I think schools could really benefit from in terms of giving them concrete mental models of how to think about future planning in a world where it is volatile, it is uncertain, it is complex, and it is ambiguous, as they say, with a VUCA world. And so we published that report with that kind of drive behind it, that kind of, this is what's bugging us, this is what's inspiring us to do a little more research around this because we know all schools could benefit from it. And you ask about how that coheres with our most recent report, the Flow of Perpetual Learning, which is really more about like, how do we support personalized individual growth of every employee, every faculty member, every staff member in a way that still in some way reinforces their strategic vision and the strategic goals of a given school or organization. And so maybe that seems like, well, what's the connection there? I think the bold connection is that not only are we going to maintain in an age of VUCA, in an age of volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous futures, we've got an idea of the systems and cultures of practice that need to be in place where you can improve and get better in a world of uncertainty. So I think this report is really inspired by, let's not be the school that survives. Let's be the school that thrives. And so what are the systems that need to be in place that we can see and describe? But better yet, what are the cultures of practice underneath those systems that make it work? That can make an institution improve, but also make every individual in that institution improve.
So walk me through the cultural pillars that are part of the report. And I'm curious, like, how did you arrive at these? And
Yeah.
then what kind of impact are you seeing, day to day now?
So there are 6 cultures that we name in the report. And again, the report is really about like, what is a system you could put in place that supports both individual growth and organizational improvement in a way that they don't, not only do they not compete with each other, but in some way they perhaps even mutually reinforce each other. And so to do that, to think about systems are the visible part of a given organizational culture. So Edgar Schein in his 3 models of his 3 layers of culture is a model that we were very much inspired by, where there are the artifacts of culture, the things you see, the systems. There are the values of a culture and the behaviors that are somewhat seeable, but dig a little deeper. There's something invisible to uncover there. And then below that are the really buried assumptions in any given culture, the beliefs that, if there's disagreement there, there's high emotional impact, between 2 individuals. And so we really wanted to think about not just the systems, but what are the cultures, the less visible things that really support. And so I'll name them for you. We had 6 cultures that we named in the report. I think for a system to reinforce both individual growth and organizational improvement according to certain strategic goals and initiatives, you've got to have a culture of common practice. You need to name, describe, and explain in explicit detail, what does successful professional practice look like at this school? And one doesn't need to start from scratch to develop that. There are a lot of different competency models out there, but we did draw on a lot of different competency models, but we also developed our own customized elements of that competency model that fit the mission and vision of our school. So a culture of common practice, I think that creates coherence for an organization. We also need a culture of inquiry. And by a culture of inquiry, I don't just mean asking questions. I mean getting in each other's spaces, observing and asking questions about each other's practice so that we can learn from each other, so that we can be curious and gain knowledge from each other, but also so that we can gather data, not to evaluate individuals, but to evaluate the system, to evaluate the programs that we have in place. And then built upon that is an assumption of competence with the individuals, and that leads to a culture of learning by doing. And what I mean by that is like giving teachers the empowerment, the autonomy, and the license to engage in authentic work together around instructional rounds, which is something we do at Mount Vernon, around PLC work, where teachers are getting together and perhaps they're engaging in certain protocols like interreliability protocols around assessment. And not just because those are great practices, but because what we've learned from organizational development literature is there is a 70-20-10 principle. And what I mean by that is 70% of what we learn is by being side by side with colleagues and doing authentic work together. 20% of what we learn is through feedback through our supervisor or something like that. And 10% would be like workshops and reading books and perhaps listening to this podcast, not to throw us under the bus with that 10%. But the point being is,
By the way, I'll take 10% for sure.
we'll take 10%, right?
Yeah.
But The point being is we need to invest in people with the confidence that they are competent and they can go and do authentic work together. So a culture of common practice, a culture of inquiry, and a culture of learning by doing. Our fourth is a culture of communication and partnership. And what I mean by that is a much more intentional partnership with your supervisor. It's not one goals meeting a year. There's got to be a greater cadence. There needs to be co-construction of those goals, not just say a goal written by a coach or a supervisor. In fact, I would advocate for a more imperfect goal written by the person than say a more perfect goal written by the supervisor. And that partnership, though, can hone in the alignment through multiple meetings through the year. But it also a partnership of communication and a culture of communication and partnership, also lends itself to more than evaluating, say, a given employee based on observations. It is based on a portfolio of work. It is based on conversations, and it is based on interrogating that portfolio of work through those conversations. And that way we see a greater picture of the iceberg than just what we see in a 30-minute classroom observation. And then we need to take that data that we've gathered through a culture of inquiry, that we've gathered through partnerships with our employees, that we've gathered through portfolio curations through learning by doing. We need to have a culture of data without blame. And what I mean by that is where we are gathering that data, we're visualizing that data, not to evaluate individuals, but to evaluate our programs, to evaluate our systems, to evaluate our buildings, to evaluate our divisions, so that we can make better strategic decisions on how we support the success of those systems, those divisions, and those operations in each building. And lastly, all of this should be working towards a culture of growth and excellence, which is anchored in a mission and in a vision and a strategic plan of a school.
How did you operationalize all this? Like, what does that look like?
It's messy. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you that in some way we have cleanly created the system that is just so well greased that it works so great. It is iterative and it is messy, but I will say we have a table. We have something we call the periodic table of teaching elements, and that would be our common practice. So we have explicitly named competencies of what success looks like to be an instructor, to be a faculty member at the Mount Vernon School. But we also have competencies that name what it means to be a successful leader at Mount Vernon School. So it's not just faculty competencies. We have competencies for all the different stakeholders of our organization. And so we established that common practice. In no way did we make that from scratch. We leaned heavily on Charlotte Danielson's framework for thinking about teacher competencies. We relied heavily on the work that's been done around inquiry-based learning for our competencies around that. And so in no way would I say that we created something from scratch, but we definitely customize it to the mission, vision, and the strategic approach of our school. And so that's one thing that we've done. I think that we've done a great job of creating norms around a culture of observation, which makes a culture of inquiry possible. And what I mean by that is no teacher, no student at our school would be surprised if a stranger walked in the room to observe practice that's going on. And that took norming, that took getting used to. But I think that anybody you would talk to at our organization understands that that's just kind of part of what it looks like to operate at Mount Vernon. Is that people come in classes, people are curious, and people ask questions. But you have to establish psychological safety norms around that so that people don't feel like it's an act of judgment as opposed to what it really is, which is some sort of endeavor of curiosity. And so we also have engaged in instructional rounds where we empower our teachers to get into cohorts and to observe each other's practice and to do debriefs together to perhaps excavate some problem of practice that they can collaborate around and help solve for. And I think that's where you see a culture of learning by doing. We have a very intentional structure around goal setting and a very intentional structure around 3 intentional meetings throughout your year with your supervisor, in the beginning, middle, and end. And we also have been experimenting with using Looker Studio for data gathering and data visualization so that when our learning and innovation team gets together, we can make decisions that are data informed and align with our strategy. And so we also, of course, have our Impact Ready project, which is our 10-year vision in terms of what is guiding us in terms of our North Star of growth and excellence, which is our last culture. So that's one way I would answer that question.
It strikes me as you're talking about like a lot of there are a lot of layers to this, right? And I can see why. I can see how it can be a little messy at times. I mean, like the messy middle, right? It's always kind of messy in the middle, but you have like structures and systems in place to ingrain this as part of the culture. But to get to that, I mean, it's a you've got to make a set of very highly strategic decisions. Like this isn't just something that I imagine emerges organically. Like this is very intentional.
Yeah.
But one thing that's really hard in an organization, in any organization, school, for profit, doesn't really matter. It's like the daily demands often get in the way of the strategic. So, like, how do you balance that as an organization? Because I do consider you guys very, very strategic. Like, there's just a lot of interesting strategy emerging out of Mount Vernon. So, in the back of my mind, I'm always wondering, like, how do you fit it all in?
Yeah. Well, I think it gets back to my comment earlier about I think we've been very intentional about setting up a dual operating system.
Mm.
And so somebody like myself has been afforded the opportunity. I feel very privileged where I get to live in a space of strategy, research, design, and futures thinking in a way that I'm not overcome by the tyrannies of the present, which is a phrase I think I've used with you before in conversation. Um, but yet we do have tyrannies of the present that an operational team needs to deal with.
Of course.
And so I think we've done a really great job of creating those two different systems. And I think that our challenge now is knowing when each system needs to talk to each other.
That was going to be my next question. Like, how do you
Yeah.
link the two? Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't think we necessarily have the perfect answer as much as we can talk to you about lived iterations that are making us better. And of course we have certain meetings where a lot of us come together and we come together with divisional heads and people like me, chief innovation officer, chief learning officer, and we discuss these strategic priorities. But I'm not going to lie to you. I think it's a challenge of knowing when do we take up time for a division's operational strategies to say like, okay, well, but how are we addressing AI integration when all we're really trying to do is get onboarded to a new learning management system?
Right.
And so, like, I'm just trying to give you a real detailed example of something that, like, yeah, when do you know when it's time for strategy versus when it's time for survival is not the right word, but
Getting through the day.
okay. So I don't know if I gave you a good answer to that.
No, I appreciate it, but what I'm hearing is that you do carve out space to be strategic, and that is central to your operating system and growing the school. Um, Jared, where does AI play into all this? Because I know when we talked before, obviously, and you mentioned this at the front, like this AI is one of those things that just fundamentally has like landed in our laps, and now we've got to figure out how to navigate it successfully, not just for us personally, but like how do we prepare our students for a world that's going to look very different when they enter the job market? So, like one topic that I've had conversations with this pod on before is I don't know what the future of jobs look like in independent schools. I just, AI is, but my guess is that, we're such a highly human centric organization that I don't see it doing some of the things that you're seeing maybe in the for-profit industry. Like I just don't see that on the immediate horizon or even midterm horizon. But I do see the potential for it to help us reclaim time to do more of the things that can be strategic and live our mission in really interesting and unique ways. So, where does Mount Vernon stand on all this?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we have thought very, very intentionally about AI and its impact upon our organization. And where we first started was we need to think about this through the lens of systems, right? And a systems thinking point of view. And one of our earlier R&D reports was called A People-Centered Organization Living in an AI World.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
And one of the original contributions from that report that we developed here is we developed something we call the 5 Ps framework. And so to think about your position, which is the first P, to AI as an organization. And that was a very intentional word choice over policy. A lot about what is AI policy for this organization. And don't get me wrong, we need clarity.
Yeah.
We need rails and we need all these things. but I balk at the word policy because policies are meant to be broken. Positions are meant to be a lot more agile. And so our first P in our 5 Ps framework was like, what is your position as an organization? But before we answer that, let's talk about the other 4 Ps. What is going to be the impact on people?
Yeah.
And so one of the ways I heard you talking about jobs and the future of jobs, I'm a big believer that we need to less talk about AI's disruption of jobs and more talk about its takeover of tasks and processes. And so I don't think we see AI. I mean, we can give the obvious examples like a cashier at a grocery store. Sure, AI could take over that. But I don't think we see a lot of cases where AI takes over jobs. We see a lot of cases where AI automates a certain task or, accelerates a certain process that thereby demands of us as humans, like, how are we going to reinvest ourselves over in this other thing that we're doing? So how's it impacting people and how are we training them up for it? But also how's it impact people in that, like, how are we training them up to be AI literate and equipping them with the success, to be able to navigate the world of AI responsibly, whether that be an office employee or a classroom teacher
Yeah.
or something else.
Yeah.
So that's 1 P. The next P is protection. And this is from like, okay, deep fakes to data privacy to misinformation, disinformation, to so many different things. How are we protecting our organization, knowing some of the more nefarious elements of AI and what it presents to us as challenges and opportunities? The 4th P I would offer is practice. Where can we put AI into practice? So where's there maybe some low hanging fruit? And I think one way to think about this is, where's your data? Where's it talking to it? Where's data talking to each other? And how can you get it? Like, it's not about getting a bunch of coders on your campus, because we don't need coders, but we need to think about data and how we're getting data to talk to each other in ways that we can put AI into practice in very, very informative, innovative, and efficient ways. And then lastly, how does it impact our programming offerings, our programs? And so I really mean by this, like, for instance, as a competency-based education school, what are the integral competencies that will make someone live and thrive in the age of intelligent machines? We need to ask that question, identify those competencies, and then ask ourselves, do our programs reflect that? And so we might see some needs for some shifts in programmatic offerings. So going back to it, how you answer the question about people, how you answer the question about protection, how you answer the question about practice in programs, I think goes back to the first P and helps us define what our position is as a school in terms of how we are embracing, but also protecting ourselves from this new emergent technology.
Yeah, that's a great way to frame it. I mean, I think frameworks are so important, and this just offered a lot of clarity in my mind. Jared, you have been terrific. I really do appreciate you coming on the show today to talk about some of the research that you all are doing at Mount Vernon Ventures. So my last question for you is, if somebody wants to reach out, how can they do that? And then where can they gain access to all these reports?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. Go to mvventures.org and visit our website. I think what you'll see there is immediately you'll see an invitation to subscribe to our newsletter. Please do. We put out some great content. I'm biased, of course, but I think we put out some great content. And then also, you can click on, products that we offer, and you will see links to our R&D reports. They're all free to download, and I encourage you to do so. And I will just emphasize again that I think MV Ventures is in the business of 3 things. One, we are in the business of research and synthesizing research so that you don't have to spend your bandwidth doing that. And so that we can package reports in a way that equips leaders at schools to be informed as much as they need to be informed, to go into meetings and be dangerous, if you will. Right.
Yeah.
And so that's the first thing that we do. I think the second thing we do is, we often say transformation needs a guide. I kind of want to change our tagline to complexity needs a guide. We are living in complex times. And sometimes you need an outside observer. Sometimes you need an outside partner who can come in and help you navigate that complexity. It's not that we're being hit by a tsunami of AI or things like that. I would just say we're whitewater rafting, and whitewater rafting needs a guide. It's complex. And at times it's a little bit alarming. And somebody there who can help us and have a different perspective is very, very beneficial. The third thing we do at MV Ventures is product development. And so we develop products. And so we have a lot of products there. But that is something that is born out of those first two reasons to exist, which is we are here to research and synthesize research to help schools improve. And we are here to partner with them to guide us through complexity in a way that sometimes an outside partnership is needed. The product development is third. So,
Yeah, that's terrific. Jared Colley, Chief Innovation Officer, Mount Vernon School. Thank you again. I really do appreciate it.
thank you, Peter. It was great to be on your pod.